Thank you, Wendy. As Wendy said, what we want to look at is hopefully something that's seasonally relevant now the weather's warming up. So we're going to look at heat stroke cases, specifically what's going on with them when they present to us, and therefore what are our priorities in terms of treatment and trying to get them stabilized, and the implications elsewhere in the body on the organ systems. And then we're going to have a look at a couple of toxicities or poisoning cases that tend to be a bit more common during the summer and are just a bit slightly more unusual than the routine treatments we would have with most poisoning cases. So if we're talking about heat stroke, strictly speaking, we're talking about hyperthermia, so high body temperatures. Now normally we've got a fairly strict control over thermoregulation within the body, and that's going to be controlled by our thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus. So if the temperature rises or the temperature falls above or below a set point that the hypothalamus has established, we're going to have changes in our physiology, changes in behavior to try and bring the temperature back to the set point. So various definitions, but widely accepted, we tend to take with our dog canine patients, if we're going to focus on mainly, we're going to really classify hypothermia as a temperature in excess of 41 degrees centigrade. Now we know we're going to get a high body temperature for several reasons. So if we've got a hypothermic patient that's got a temperature in excess of 41 degrees centigrade, it might be that we've got a pyrogenic cause of that hypothermia. So in a pyrogenic cause, we've got infection or we've got inflammation, often viral, bacterial problems going on. And due to the presence of that pyrogen causing stimulation being present within the body, the hypothalamus sets a new temperature set point. So we've actually trying to maintain things and trying to hold things at a higher body temperature. So that's physiologically normal that we've got that alteration and we're trying to hold things at a higher temperature. And from an evolution point, that probably helps in terms of trying to kill off infections. If you imagine we've got these viruses and bacteria that for thousands, millions of years have evolved to function at body temperature in the dog. If we try and shift and catch them out and raise that body temperature, we can try and just make the environment a bit more hostile for them. So that's going to be pyrogenic, and that's normal. Non-pyrogenic hypothermia, then obviously we've got something going on. We've still got the same normal set point that the hypothalamus wants to establish and wants to keep to, but for some reason the body can't keep within that set range. Very, very rarely that can be due to damage to the hypothalamus, and our ability to get that set point and keep within it via homeostasis is completely wrecked. Occasionally it can be due to drugs and certain medications, but most commonly, and what we want to focus on this evening and this time of year, is that that could well be due to environmental causes, that we've got higher ambient temperatures, or we've got a patient that's locked somewhere in a very hot environment, and they're unable, even though the hypothalamus recognizes the temperature's going higher, we're unable to dissipate that heat. And we're going to hopefully look at this evening that that's got some fairly severe consequences in terms of physiology going on elsewhere within the major organ systems of the body. So again, various textbooks are going to tell you we get various illnesses as we get high body temperatures. So as that heat load increases, again, the canine body, canine cells that make the tissue, that make the organs, are all designed to work most efficiently within a certain temperature range, so that we can produce energy and have metabolism within that range, and our enzymes are all working quite happily. So various things will be described. What we really want to look at is heat stroke. Heat cramps just tend to be taken to mean, you know, the patient's reluctant to walk. We got water, we got sodium depletion, a dehydrated patient. Heat exhaustion, we may have fatigue and weakness, but it's something they're going to recover from fairly quickly, just by seeking cool shade, or, you know, sorting themselves out from that point of view. What we're really looking at is heat stroke, and the common definition of that is that we've got heat exhaustion, we've got hyperthermia, and we're going to get central nervous system involvement, and we're going to get dysfunction of multiple organ systems, and we'll come to that later, exactly what's happening to these organ systems, and therefore what do we need to address in terms of really stabilizing this patient and trying to prevent further damage. So as the body temperature rises, certain things are going to happen, and we'll go through each of these in a second. So we've got protective mechanisms. Obviously, the body is frantically going to try and sort itself out and try and rein things in. So we're going to try and thermoregulate as the body temperature gets higher. So best way, if we've got increasing temperature or increasing heat load, we're going to try and dissipate some of that heat and get rid of that heat back out into the environment.
Sorry, Paul. I just need to stop you for a minute. We've just lost your screen. I'm going to make you presenter again, and it should fix it.
So what were we saying? So obviously, the body temperature rises. We're going to have protective mechanisms that are going to kick in. So we're going to try and lose heat via heat dissipation and shift some of that back out into the environment. And we're going to have metabolic and physiological changes. So we'll briefly talk about acute phase responses and heat shock proteins in a couple of slides' time, which is basically the body trying to alter and trying to protect what's going on to try and minimize damage to organs and try and maximize metabolism. So obviously, if we're talking about heat stroke, if we're talking about this heat load increasing, a lot of that is going to come from the environment at this time of year. So if we're talking about heat gain going into the body, obviously we produce some heat via metabolism, some heat via exercise and muscle activity. If we've got a dog chasing around, running after balls in the park or one thing or another, that's going to push up our heat gain. And obviously, if we've got high environmental temperatures, whether that's laying out in the sun, whether that's locked in a car, locked in a conservatory, we tend to see a few dogs that end up that way. So we've got various means that we're going to gain heat. And we've got a very limited way in terms of dissipating heat, especially as a dog. So we've got behavioural aspects. Obviously, sensible dog is going to stand up and go and walk and go and lay in the shade rather than laying in the sun. Very importantly, two most important ones, probably a vasodilation. So if we're trying to lose heat and we're trying to lose heat through the skin and dissipate that back into the environment, the more blood we can get running beneath the skin to try and dissipate that heat, the better. So if we can vasodilate our capillaries beneath the skin, we can try and cool down further by dissipating heat from the blood into the environment. Evaporative cooling is going to be very important to our dog because they've got no sweat glands to lose heat elsewhere in terms of evaporation. So evaporative cooling in a dog is going to be panting and shifting air back and forward over a wet tongue and a wet upper respiratory tract to try and get rid of some heat that way as well. And then we've got radiation and we've got convection as means of dissipating heat from out of the body. So really, if we're talking about radiation, this is just the animal sat there and temperature heat radiating out into the environment passively. So it's naturally going to move into the surrounding environment. If we're talking about convection, and this is something we can try and help and try and maximize the hot patient, got circulating air flowing over the animal, that's going to again dissipate heat and shift heat off the patient. Conduction, not really something we're going to be able to use a great deal, but again, this is probably part of the behavior in a dog that's getting too hot. It's going to go and lay on a cold floor or a cold concrete surface or go and lay in the shade, and we're going to transmit some heat directly into that colder surface. But as we said, probably most important in terms of losing most heat when this temperature is rising within the body, it's going to be our heat loss via evaporation. So when the environmental temperature gets higher and the patient starts to pant more and more due to stimulation from the hypothalamus is going to sense that the body temperature is going up, and it's going to stimulate the panting sensor, and we're going to see that behavioural effect as we try and shift more and more air back and forward over this wet surface to try and lose more and more heat via evaporation as well. So we're going to do that in terms of behaviour, heat dissipation. What we've already mentioned as well is that obviously if we're trying to lose temperature from the body, it's going to be sensible to try and bring that heat, if we like, up to the surface of the body to help with convection and help with radiation and help with evaporative heat loss. So what we're going to need to do is to vasodilate blood vessels that are sat just beneath the skin, within the mouth, etc. from there. So closer to the surface we can bring that heat within the blood, the easier it's going to be to lose that heat out into the environment as well. So again, thermoreceptors are going to pick up these heat changes, and that's going to lead to peripheral vasodilation to try and shift the blood that way and lose some heat through the surface. Now obviously we've also got to have something, if we just vasodilate